Inspired by April's appearance on a panel entitled Religion is Divisive, and in the shadow of Martin Luther King Jr. Day, we dig into the ways religion can be used to defend or to dismantle systemic oppression.
You're listening to the Joyous Justice Podcast,
a weekly show hosted by April Baskin with Tracy Guy Decker.
In a complex world in which systemic oppression conditions us to deny others and our own humanity, let's dedicate ourselves to the pursuit and embodiment of wholeness, love, and thriving in the world and in our own lives. It's time to heal and flourish our way to a more joyously just future. Hey, Tracy. Hey, friend. Hey, friends.
Hey there, April.
So we are recording this on a Sunday, and on the Friday before this Sunday, I had the honor of being asked to speak at a seminar at Columbia that I honestly didn't fully understand what it was about. Like, I thought I was speaking to like a seminar of undergrad or graduate students, but it turns out it's like intellectuals from multiple universities who are coming together for this project and doing like a discussion series, like an intellectual discussion series, and inviting scholars and subject matter experts on a range of issues to respond to the prompt, religion, and the subtext is American religion is ... And they've gone through political, and I honestly don't remember the other ones they mentioned the other day, but hypothetically like healing or something. And the one that I was invited along with 4 other co-panelists to speak to was American Religion is Divisive. And that conversation wasn't exactly private per se, but it was a closed door conversation. But I thought I would share some of the ideas that I had and some of the interesting bits and things that I took away from that exchange of ideas from some leading edge thinkers on these subjects. And I thought that our relationship and partnership in this podcast would be a great place for us to do what April and Tracy do with conversations and put our unique intellectual, spiritually, and social justicely inspired stank on this prompt. American religion is ellipses divisive. And what I will say to this is like my first thought when I hear that, when I read that, and also one of the professors in the space also invited a reframe of that prompt that I think has some interesting implications, which is, I think it was something along the lines of religion as it's developed within the United States is divisive. Right. And so when I first hear this, my thought is, this is a common thought that a lot of people say and think that I kind of I would begin with, I don't agree with, in the sense that it's so very either or, and I have a both and approach. So I ultimately do agree with it, but it's so like such a polarizing and simplistic viewpoint, and also is rooted in, and I don't mean to insult many different people, and a number of whom who say this either have been witness to and or have personally been harmed by encounters with religion in America. So so that's not something to dismiss. But my first thought is, this is what a lot of people say. And as a coach, as someone who thinks critically about a number of issues in the world, I'm someone who's much more of a fan of nuance. And this is very much a both and situation for me. And my first thought is, I don't know if it's so much that religion is divisive, so much as systemic oppression and histories of harm are divisive, and religion has been both complicit in and also has actively served to fight, has played all different kinds of roles in the context of systemic oppression, and religion at times throughout history and in the United States has certainly been used as a vehicle for both harm and healing. And to me, if religion didn't exist, whatever might be in its form, or that there would be some other vehicle that either would be created or that was in existence that would have been leveraged to be in service of systems of oppression, which doesn't mean that in some cases with certain religions, in certain ways, that some of the origins of systemic oppression might have some of their roots, say, in elements of Christian hegemony. And the ways during, like, when people were, help me, I'm not as into that facet of history, but like in the Middle Ages and stuff, right? I learned in sociology, but right, thank you, right? The Crusades, but even before then, or around that time, like when people were peasants and things, like the ways that the church, in collaboration, what's the word, in terms of being complicit with state oppression, or being in service of it, started to shift some of the theology to better serve people working themselves to the bone until the day they die, in the hopes that they would then go to heaven. So that's a little bit of my interest. So I was a bit more polished in certain ways when I was speaking, because I had 8 minutes to share my bit. And so I shared a little bit of what I shared. And now I'm a little bit more relational and free form with you around it, Tracy, and with our friends listening in. But that's a little bit of my intro for it. And a number of interesting ideas were shared, people who are really studying this in different ways. A really cool leader bringing in some joyous justice aligned thoughts. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his name correctly. Hopefully I will, because I feel like we might eventually be like professional friends or colleagues in some way. He's a cool guy. David, you thought his last name might be pronounced Cumin?
Yeah.
Cumin Kim. He is a director of, I don't remember the precise name, but essentially a racial justice center at Stanford. We'll include information about all of this in the show notes. And he shared a piece in advance about that was published in a journal about love and the role of love in the public square in the context of these conversations. And also too, I loved I was like, oh, why didn't I think of that when he was speaking? He said, and so there's this question. And then there's also there's the questions that follow it to me around what, in light of the ways that American religion is and is not divisive, what are the opportunities for solidarity that we have? What do we want to aspire to? And I was like, oh, why didn't I think to say that? That's and also, like, it's nice, because he's not that much, but he's I believe he's older than me, and I'm like, okay, I still have more time to integrate all these different ways of my knowing. But I was like, way to bring in the joyous justice element here, David. That was interesting. So, but I want us to have our own conversation around it now. So that's my intro, Tracy. I pass it over to you to respond to me, to share your own thoughts about it, bring in any juicy anecdotes or metaphors, whatever's arising for you. Yeah, you're welcome.
I had similar thoughts to you in terms of the, like, wow, that's very either or. Like, I feel like I'm seeing that a lot. I mean, just personally in my social media feed, I saw somebody recently who was like, this thing has this bad effect, therefore we should get rid of it.
It's like my stone metaphor thing. Like,
yeah. And it's like, so your stone metaphor specifically is that people say, a stone has been used as an object, as a
hurt
weapon,
people. So we need to get rid of all stones.
Right. And not recognizing that stones can also be used to build and to heal.
Castles and heal. Yeah.
So I think there's that. There's also, like, even something that like an act, like, it can be done poorly.
Right.
Field, right? Like,
correct.
There are bad doctors. That doesn't mean we should throw away medicine.
Right.
Like, as a field. And that's what this acquaintance of mine was saying on social media.
Right. And in medicine. Right. And about medicine, it's so fascinating because there's so many ways in mainstream medicine that has deeply ingrained, that has deeply embedded within it, systemic oppression and bias and different things. But, like, that would be really ill-advised. So
right.
Just like, yes, it needs massive change. And also it also saves lives every single day, even as it fails a number of people. I still think overall, and more often than not, is saving lives. And, like, that's an important variable here, even if we levy a hefty critique at a given field or institution.
Yeah. So specifically about religion being divisive, and one of the things that, that also comes up for me, I'm trying to decide what order to do this in, is that it's been my experience, this is personally with individuals. So I'm just going to name that, but it's been my experience that when folks are like fully grounded and centered and comfortable in their own faith, that others' faiths are not a threat, right? Like that they can learn about it and see what resonates and see where it's different, and that's all okay. And that folks who are maybe a little less, they don't even necessarily recognize that they're less
right, and be conscious,
centered.
yeah, right.
Right. But for whatever reason, their faith is more vulnerable.
They feel endangered.
Then all of a sudden, another faith becomes a threat and must be tamped down or controlled or denied or proved to be wrong.
Intergenerational trauma, blah.
And that's something that I've noticed personally as a former scholar of religion. So I've spent a lot of time with a lot of religious folks from different traditions. So that's just something that like comes up when I hear that phrase, that religion is divisive. I think of my religion as like, I don't know, like I'm borrowing a little from George Carlin, had a bit, but that I don't want to get into, but if you know it, like you'll know that that's where I get it. It was kind of like a pair of comfortable shoes that like really feel good to me and make it easier for me to walk longer distances. I would never expect my shoes to fit you, though I'm happy to let you try them.
Your
on.
shoes are lovely, Tracy. I have seen them.
But that's sort of like, and I would never deny you your own shoes that are made to fit your feet, well worn, and your gait.
Yeah. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so that's another thing that sort of comes up to me that I think helps to further, for me, kind of explain what I noticed before. Like if other people's shoes aren't quite comfortable while they're walking, or like something about it just isn't quite working, then, it becomes more important that everything match.
Mm-hmm.
So that those are some of the things that were coming up for me immediately, because it's not actually religion. It's not religion that's divisive. It's the requirement or the expectation or the demand or the insert verb here, that we all agree about religion.
Well, that's one facet, right?
Divisive.
Well, so that's one facet of it. And then, so here's the interesting thing is that I don't have the full background on the purpose of the seminar. So there's like part of me that wants to bring in certain things that were said, but I think perhaps my sense is maybe they're like potentially preparing a white paper or a series of things around it. So I'm going to be like what you said spawned a couple different thoughts that I'm really excited to share now, Tracy, that are like, that's fresh thinking. So one of the pieces that like, Ibu Patel is in the room, who runs Interfaith America, that does really important work. And he shared his TED talk that's worth checking out, his TEDx talk that speaks to all of the different positive things that religion has brought to American life. Like he notes that a large majority of hospitals are faith-based and they serve a wide clientele, that a number of universities, that his personal narrative, that his family has deeply benefited from the resources offered to his father. I think his father maybe went to Notre Dame as a South Asian Muslim man, that they, that there's, and also that a large percentage, like I don't know if it's 60% or some large percentage of social services in this country and in various parts of the countries are through different institutions. So that was said, and I feel like that was brought into, that was a part of some of the pre-readings that were sent, and that's something that's out in the ether. So I feel comfortable saying that. But one thing that I wanted to bring up that was a tension I felt, in the conversation that evolved too, is that I think, you're naming one facet of the ways that religion a reason why religion can be divisive. And I would add some other pieces that I think you're aware of that also both did and didn't explicitly come to mind. But as I heard people talking about other things in a way that I felt like was missing, just even a light acknowledgement, just a subtle, like preface or caveat that a number of different institutions or individuals or people who had certain negative intentions can use religion at times, the Christian church, but also other religious vehicles too, for incitement, for the incitement of violence, right? Or for the restricting of people's civil liberties or different things along that nature. And there was an interesting...
Or historically, to your point earlier, like for justification for
right? That a number of people, I think, would say in really compelling ways that wasn't the church, but that, the KKK used crosses, right? Like they burned crosses. It was religious iconography.
Well, certainly agents of the church during slavery used Christian
which is like an example of what I alluded to earlier, but I think when you get into the specificity of the ways that it starts to get really visceral and very upsetting very quickly, right? That it's not when I say that religion can be complicit in systems of oppression, that can seem somewhat distant, as opposed to people were incited by their churches or houses of worship to target, maim, and murder. And to incite racial terror, right? And so that's right. And so somebody said something that was really interesting that I think perhaps I should honor the container, the confidentiality of the container, but I want to say something off of it. So one thing to think about is and there's obviously a lot of diversity, but are there certain ways that religion takes form and across different experiences, the way that it works, and it functions often, not always, but within a number of different communities, certainly within Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. It goes into the realm of like spirit and energy in different ways, and has different orientations with that. And in a context in the United States, right now I'm reading and really loving it. I think it's the book that I was looking for the past few years, the Myth of Normal by Dr. Gabor Mate, that is like combining all the things that I've been working to combine about like feelings and spirit and body and emotions and ailments and mental health stuff, and combining all these different things. And I'm in this section where he's talking about emotions and spirit and energy and different things of that nature. And he says, but also we just know this in general in our culture that, and this ties a little bit into what you spoke about in the previous episode. It's weird. Like it's basically in our culture, there's an aversion to having meaningful awareness around emotion and spirit and energy and these different things that are, well, for some people in their ethos, it doesn't exist at all. From my perspective, they very much do exist, and there's any number of ways you can orient them, and it's actually quite powerful, and it fills a particular need in the human experience. And often religion is one of the primary vehicles that people get touched and that people get nourishment and or potentially poison around those subjects in a way that's not so regulated in other ways. There's a bit of that in terms of mental health, and even that is still somewhat constrained around emotions and feelings, but in terms of spirit or like energy, different things of this nature, our orientation or lack thereof with a higher power. But I just see how that could add to the perspective about something that we otherwise don't know much of. There's not really, I mean, there's starting to be now, but over US history, religion has largely dominated that space in different ways, and there hasn't been something external that could also, outside of, I mean, there were some things, but they were attempted to be annihilated through like indigenous cultures and also other cultures in the world. And so, and these are things that really honestly compel a lot of people and heavily influence how they live and how they vote, what they view about these things. And people often cling to their beliefs about this these experiences in different ways really intensely. And there's just a way where that dynamic to me contributes to, at times, people perceiving that religion is divisive, because that's an area that's kind of similar to, but different in terms of what I talk about collective trauma and how people conflate interpersonal challenges often with what I think is actually the burden that we all collectively carry about the countries and different systems and structures' inability to support and be accountable around those histories of harm. And similarly with this, there aren't many, at least in American society. I think in other cultures, like in Chinese culture and other ethnic and indigenous cultures, there are structures and forms of medicine and whole fields of thinking and thought that is rooted and isn't necessarily based in religion, but is more similar to what we've gotten in an American society about how to think about the weather and how to think about math. And similarly, they say, like, these are the meridians on your body, and if you're feeling this, you can likely expect this. But in America, a lot of that thinking, for various reasons, has been relegated, or anything remotely like that has been relegated to religious space. And I think that, like, my analysis is, and then I'm happy for you to put bring your perspective on it, Tracy, is that energy is a huge part of our human experience, whether it's emotions or interpersonal energy, or the energy that we feel of collective experience, whether it's around trauma or collective joy, that this is a part of the human experience. And people have different needs around this, and they need a place for that to be met. And I think it at times has given religious institutions disproportionate power, because it was one of the only places where people could go to try in some way to get those needs met. And when you have what I already said, what we already said about a number of different religious institutions being complicit or proactively a part of systems of oppression, also then melding directly and indirectly within the realm of spirit and energy and our souls and our emotions and our hearts and the things that actually move us, right? Like, a number of my best teachers in social change work consistently say that most of these things, you can learn things, but it needs to happen at the heart level, through stories, through people connecting with their own stories, through hearing other people's stories. And that area, at times, in certain ways, and I think less so, but historically within the United States, has been situated within religious spaces.
That all jives for me. I think one of the ways that I would frame it, that I've written about before actually, is because that religion has been one of the few places where folks are able to sort of experience spiritual or energetic, socially acceptably experience those things. And because religion has been weaponized as a tool of the oppressor in some cases, especially within the 20th and 21st centuries, right? Like, some of the loudest oppressive voices say that they are speaking with a Christian lens. And so I know I have had almost like a stigma around talking about it, because of the either or thinking that I have inherited and am working to undo. Like, those who weaponize God language are often loud in the public square. And I don't want to be associated with them by using God language.
Right.
And so I just avoid using God language.
Yeah. Similarly.
Which the effect of that, right, is actually to abandon God to those who would weaponize God. At least in the public square. And I think you can replace that word God with spirit energy,
higher power,
divine,
creator,
whatever sort of more than us, more than the sum of our parts, whatever word works for you. And I think for me, that's a part of what has happened in terms of the divisiveness and what you're describing and the ways in which it has been weaponized for oppression and then stigmatized by different parts of society. So that especially white Jews, right? There's a very much like white Reformed Jews talk about God when we are in synagogue, maybe. Right? Like,
maybe. That's the bit.
Maybe.
I mean, there's even jokes about this. I know within the within what's it called? What's the JTS at the Jewish Theological Seminary? There's jokes about like, but leave God out. You know, like even within the like this is a very Ashkenazi Jewish experience among
which I
many.
think actually is a separation from our Christian neighbors who talk about God
oppressors
all the
time.
at time, who also were our
and leverage that in the context of pogroms or the Holocaust or different moments of acute.
I think that's.
I want to interject when you have a moment.
Yeah, I'm ready.
So, like, I was able to further think about this because I'm thinking about this in this kind of way for the first time. So, like, what I was talking about before, one way I would describe it is like, and I don't have an exact destination here, is the unknown. It's like energies that kind of go into the realm of the unknown. And there's lots of our lives that unknown and it actually can be known, again, as I mentioned before, in other cultures. But I'm just putting the interesting pieces together about how these things ended up working in some ways in healing, either in profoundly healing ways or in toxic ways. When we remember, which some people, like our students would know this, or people, our clients and students who've been in our coaching and learning programs. But, Professor Joy DeGruy talks a lot about the different ways that whiteness manifests and that it manifested in the context of slavery to mitigate cognitive dissonance. And massive emotional numbing was one of them. And so that set up, and so that became, not only through that, but also through other means, became a way of, and similarly with sexism. So you had like two of these massive, long-standing sexism, even longer forms of deeply entrenched systemic oppression. And this is true of a lot of systemic oppression, but especially in these cases that heavily, in order for the dehumanization of different populations to occur and for other people to be functional, there needed to be massive numbing and distancing from emotion to be the norm. And yet at the same time, during these formative years in our country, when there are many immigrant populations and encounters of difference and fighting for land, mostly in the context of land theft, but different people fighting for land and sovereignty from different angles, or for sovereignty or power over. And there are things like fear that are arising. And when there's not a place, and so I already kind of said this, but I'm also now thinking about like bringing in other pieces of things that I know and thinking about then who is left to deal with fear when society in general is actively engaging in a range of emotional numbing techniques to decrease the cognitive dissonance from being collectively, directly and indirectly, deeply engaged and invested in horrific dehumanization in the context of slavery, in the context of the attempted genocide of indigenous peoples, and in the context of women in public space and in private space being the targets of horrific dehumanization and violence and oppression and at times death. The jokes that are in our common parlance and our language that many of us don't know have a history about violence or against women and gender nonconforming folks and trans folks. I'm just continuing to chew on this with you. That I'm not fully sure. Like the thought hasn't fully formed, but there's like an interesting interplay here where there's this void. And that doesn't mean that even with all this tamping down, people still have fears and different feelings that they need an outlet to process in some way if they're going to be able to be somewhat functional human beings, even within this. And since institutions were really locking it down in different ways, and even within the mental health industry, like even within the mental health system, there's deep history around this for a long time, right? Around calling women hysterical, around any sense of feeling about the horrific trauma that is a part of life as a woman for most of human history, and pathologizing that rather than being like, it makes sense that she would want to cry. Like, it makes sense today when things are much better that many women would want to cry for days on end in light of things they are navigating. And yet, just so juicy. So maybe we can conclude by like either taking, I'm not sure if it's Mr. or Doctor, or Professor, but David Kim's approach, David Cuban Kim, and pardon me, new friend David, hi, if you hear this, if I'm mispronouncing your name, or if anybody knows, you can message us and phonetically spell it for us if you've had the pleasure of working with and getting to know him beyond a quick introduction on a seminar. What would we want to put at the end of that ellipses of like American religion is, how would we want to conclude it? Do you want to go first, or would you like me to go first, Tracy? I feel like I want you to go first, but also if you don't want to, it's fine.
Are you saying that I would like to be able to say this in the future, or this is what I'd like to say about it now?
Now, like if we would want to, like, just not like as a final thing, but just like if we both agree that like divisive is overly simplistic, and also doesn't do anything to acknowledge concepts like shout out to Dr. King, you know, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and his conception of and aligned movements continued championing of the concept of beloved community, which aligns very deeply with themes around that we talk about it within Joyous Justice, about how do we eradicate oppression without eradicating or targeting people, but instead targeting systems and patterns and behaviors, and honoring the divinity within all of us and moving toward what we call collective liberation, and what different people within the Christian community and from Dr. King's lineage call beloved community, which is deeply aligned of living in a world where there is no poverty, where there is justice, where people have their needs met, where there is no war, where there is no military, minimal or no military, where we are able to coexist and live well and have more peaceful, unarmed approaches to navigating conflicts. Conflict's still going to happen, but in a way that's more humanized. So anyway, I forgot how it got on that just now, but
you wanted us to answer the question,
but going back to the question. Yeah. So just to say that, like, obviously there's also but so like American religion is, or like religion is,
I feel like there's a couple different ways that I could go. Like the first thing that came to mind is complicated. Religion is complicated. That was the very first thing that came to mind. And then the second thing, which is maybe a controversial statement.
Let's hear it.
American religion is providing services that should be provided by the state. That's the second one that came to mind.
That was my thought when I was listening to Mr. Patel's talk, was like, okay, that's true and that's good, but also the state should be offering those foundational services and offering foundational inclusion.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that. And I love that. And thank you. Those are two great ones. I mean, I think there's like endless ones. We could like do it for a little. So I think for me, April type stuff is coming up. So I'm trying to think like what's more concise. American religion would benefit from compassionate accountability. American religion deserves to celebrate all that it brings, and can also, in the different facets and ways it shows up, take time to reflect historically and now if there are ways that it is a part of perpetuating harm and sign up for our Grounded and Growing program, or our roadmap to resilience, and or not, but just take time to look at with eyes of compassion and restorative justice of there's probably some reason somewhere back there, even if it was from a mostly oppressive place where someone felt unsafe. And we can look back at that and perhaps cringe a little bit, but also have compassionate hearts and energy toward that. And so to me, American religion can benefit from compassionate accountability and having the opportunity to finish that thought that I just started, to celebrate what is great and to also look deeply at places where we could align more with beloved community and joyous justice and collective liberation. Let's see. American religion is ours to claim. So for those of us who have been traumatized by it, in the ways and places that make sense, there's so many different opportunities around the country, online, for people to find places where we can heal. And if we want it, and also we might not, there are a number of people who are secular. And so I would add in also, like, American religion is optional. Unlike some people, like, I think, from a Jewish perspective, or some progressive Jews, like, I think it's Rabbi Larry Hoffman, a prominent Reform rabbi, once said, from his perspective, that Judaism doesn't exist just to exist. It exists because it's of service to the world. It's of service to Jews, and it's of service to the world. And the point at which it just exists for just continuity itself, it's not worth continuing. And so I don't know if that's true of other people's religions or spiritual practices, but, I think
I have heard Christian ministers, Reverend Dr. Brad Braxton, I heard talk about if the church becomes just a social club, then it has lost its way, and it is in fact exists to serve. So
serve and to provide spiritual nourishment. So I liked what I just said, but I forgot what it was already. But what did I say a moment ago? American religion
ours to claim.
Is ours to claim.
Optional.
Yeah, or optional, right? Because there's also as many benefits as it has. There are also folks who are secular and coming from a place of love. I don't think that an ethical. I mean, I have a hard time envisioning a society that doesn't acknowledge spirit in any way. But I can envision multiple countries, and I think there are some who operate beautifully and well and can care for their people very well without religion. So to me, from my perspective, American religion is optional. And even a number of the studies show this in various communities, including certainly the Jewish community, but others are panicked about this. And that to me is not the greatest concern. I think justice and spiritual nourishment and shared belonging and care and collective care are very important. And the ways in which we can leverage and relate to our religions so that they are in service of that. And it all is a little bit like chicken and egg, because, these ideas that I'm sharing and these values, at least for me, are deeply rooted in my spiritual upbringing and honestly interfaith exposure across different traditions. So, I think it has, and I think American religion has some cleaning up to do and a lot to celebrate, and is ours to claim and make the most of for our own spiritual and communal fulfillment, and to continue to work for, if I want to use some traditional patriotic language, a more perfect and just, let's scrap perfect, perfect, a more just and loving union and country that incorporates land back and peace and courage and action. And yeah, anything else you want to add, Tracy?
I feel like it's like a whole nother episode, so I'll hold it.
All right. Much love, friends. Wishing you a great week. And we look forward to being in touch. And as always feel free to reach out if you'd like to follow up with additional ideas, either on our website contact form, or if you want to tag one of us on social media and share your thoughts, we also welcome that too. All right. Until next time, much love.
Hey, before you go, I wanted to talk to you about something. Odds are you have been conditioned to treat certain behaviors as simply the cost of success. Things like urgency, fear, people-pleasing, and ignoring your own feelings and needs. These defaults maintain a harmful status quo, and ultimately, they undermine your capacity to reach your desired destination. Hashtag burnout, anyone? We can show you alternatives. Join us at a 5-day workshop, Roadmap to Resilience. It's just 1 hour a day at noon Eastern, starting January 23rd for 5 days. If you can't make one session, don't sweat it. We record them all. Find the link to register in the show notes. We'll see you there.
Thanks for tuning in.
To learn more about Joyous Justice LLC, our team, and how you can get involved with our community, check out the info in our show notes or find us at joyousjustice.com.
If you enjoyed this episode, show us some love.
Subscribe wherever you're listening.
Tell your people. Share what you're learning and how your leadership is evolving.
Stay humble,
But not too humble,
and keep going.
because the future is ours to co-create.